Hey friends, in this video I'm going to go over a step-by-step process for a portrait commission I recently finished for Sierra Club. When I get these commissions, typically what happens is I'm given a few photos to work off of, and I send over a couple rough sketches, and then the art director and some of the editors decide ultimately which sketch to work off of. And a lot of times the photos I'm given aren't exactly the highest quality, or perhaps the lighting isn't that favorable. So much of what I need to do when I'm drawing things out is make sure that the portrait is, first of all, flattering, but also that the lighting is something I'm a bit more comfortable with. And that typically means that the shadows and the areas of light and midtone really help to illustrate the shape of the skull and the form of the face, as opposed to some of the really high flash photography that I'm often given. So the first couple minutes here, what I'm really doing is shaping things out, not necessarily based on the facial features, but more based on the areas that I know are kind of illustrated by the skull, and how the skull affects lighting and how the skull affects shapes that I can see and identify. And then I'll get into some of the more defined lines and some of the more detailed areas. Like right now here, I'm working on the teeth, and when I'm rendering teeth, I tend to shape out the bottoms of the teeth first, and then I'll go in on the tops of the teeth where you can see some of the gum line. And I like to do this more than separating them out individually, because I can get a little more of a sense of a rhythm, I guess you'd say. So here I am working on the tops of the teeth. And even though this might look like a darker pencil at first, you can see some of the lighter lines here. This is a sage colored color pencil, and it's actually called Earth Green, made by Faber-Castell. And I like to draw with this first and then go over top with more of a navy blue once I've really got to define some lines. So some of these marks that are kind of like searching lines or a bit more hesitant, those aren't going to end up really mattering all that much by the time I'm done. And the other thing to keep in mind is that this is the drawing that I'm going to paint directly over top. So again, I'm finding a way to create value that'll perhaps come through as I add paint. And I'm also just making sure that I have something that can be contained that I can paint over top of. A lot of times I think someone might look at this and think, wow, this drawing is something you're going to actually paint over top. But for me, it's just easier to paint once I have some of these shadows already understood, and once I have some of these edges already understood. And I don't think of the painting process as if it's a coloring book necessarily, but it is nice to have something that, again, helps me just kind of contain things. And I also look at the drawing process as if I'm almost creating like a muscle memory. So as I do some of these lines and edges, I'm really just practicing for when I paint. That way the marks I make aren't entirely unfamiliar. They're something that I've done before and I have an understanding of. So I've now gone over the drawing with a little bit of that navy blue color pencil. I'm going back in with earth green just to define a few of the shaded areas a little more. I could take this as detailed as I want, but again, it's going to change because it's going to be painted. So I like to get it complete looking, but not totally refined. Then I go into my garage at my studio and spray it with a little bit of workable fixative. This helps to seal the drawing. That way it doesn't smudge as I paint. Adding a little bit of water here with my fancy carafe and the ugly jar. So now I'm going to begin mixing colors. And I'm working with golden acrylic paint here, and this is a Masterson Stay Wet palette. I tend to only use tubes of the primary colors and white, a little bit of a darker blue here, phthalo blue, and then a gray. And this first color I use, I cover the whole drawing with, and it kind of works as a theme color. So what you're not seeing here is that I've already sort of made a little bit of a color comp, and I know which colors I'm going to tend to stick to. And that first color, again, kind of binds everything together. I look at it as a theme color. And this color I'm mixing here is going to work as the shadow colors on the shirt. And then that'll also carry over into some of the shadows that you actually see on the face. And as I'm mixing color, I tend to let things overlap on the palette. I think of it as a Venn diagram, and what it does is it kind of unifies things. It makes it so the colors feel like they're affected by the same light. So again, mixing a darker color based on some colors I've already mixed. And this color I'm going to go in on the hair, in on some of the areas in the beard. And ultimately, this will go into the eyes and some of the other just sort of darker places on the face. And this is re-establishing some of the line work that I've already done. So, obviously you can see the drawing through the paint at this point, and that's because things have been watered down. And some of those parts may end up popping through in the final rendering. Not everything has to be completely covered in thick paint or totally fleshed out. So I kind of like having parts that feel undone as a means of just letting the painting exist as a painting. So now I'm mixing flesh tone colors. And again, thinking of the Venn diagram, working off of colors I've already made. And I'm trying to work from the shadow areas, I would say, and then work progressively brighter. And again, this is based on a photo where some of these shadows were very kind of washed out in the original reference image. So I'm doing a little bit of inventiveness just by applying some of the anatomical knowledge that I have. Going in on the eye with some kind of grayish purple here. So the flesh tone colors, they're not going to always be uh, exactly flesh tones. I like to have a little bit of freedom as I move around here. But here I'm getting progressively lighter, working that color around. This color has much more green in it, a little bit of the green that you actually see in the shirt. Um, and maybe it'll stay that way, or maybe I'll push it around more. This part here is definitely have more green in it. And again, if it's not perfect, that's okay. The nice thing with acrylics is you can go over top of them, um, and unlike watercolor or even gouache, you can cover up a color pretty easily. It might take a couple swipes, but you can get there. Now, one thing I know about mixing colors is that when you want to mute something, you end up adding the complement to it. So some of these colors are quite orange, but when you mix them with some of the blue that I already had there, it helps to mute them. And some of these colors that look pretty gray right now may appear more saturated as the painting goes on. So, the painting process is not just smooth. It's not that everything looks clean or together, or it's something that I necessarily even feel confident about the whole time. There's a lot of searching. There's a lot of figuring things out. There's a lot of moments of, oh, this doesn't look so good. How am I going to take this flawed area and fix it? And then you might spend another 20 minutes and that flawed area actually doesn't look so bad. So there's some leaps of faith you have to take. So I'm brightening up the eye here, adding a little bit of the underside of the tongue that you can see right there. I might darken that later. We'll see. I'd say one of my favorite parts of painting flesh tones and portraiture in general is when you can have a little bit of freedom in the color choices. So this is getting pretty blue there. And even though these highlights look like they are kind of perfectly matched up with the flesh tone colors at this point, there's a bit more yellow and blue in them. So I'm hoping by the time this is finished, that might pop through. Getting in some of those just very specific highlights, which you kind of want to leave till the end. Everything is a work in progress. Everything is under construction as you're going. So some of these more fine details and the smaller brushes in particular, I try to think about using towards the end when I can really refine things. See how those greens turned out? I think I'm actually going to leave those like that. I kind of like the way that looks. All right, just kind of reestablishing some lines around the eyes here. So obviously this video has been edited and I've taken out a lot of pausing and questioning about color mixing that happens along the way. But in all, this portrait took about 2.5, 3 hours, which is pretty standard for when I'm doing something that is a shoulders up headshot. Here's the final version. Here's what it looked like photographed. All right, thanks for tuning in.